want to now hear from Peter Zamora, who is Regional Counsel for MALDEF. And for those of you who do not know, in addition to Peter being an incredible advocate and a very, very skilled lawyer, he is also a teacher at heart. So Peter brings a wonderfully unique perspective to these issues as well. Peter.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes, todos. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Congressman Hinojosa and Congressman Honda, who delivered some eloquent remarks and also have been great supporters of us here on the Hill. MALDEF, we are a national civil rights legal organization. So when we talk about No Child Left Behind, we view this as a civil rights law. Now, organizations representing business groups view it as an economic competitiveness law, but for us, it's an important civil rights law. And I think that's true both because of the history of the Act, that many forget, with all of the concentration around 2001 and President Bush, that actually originated as part of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs back in 1965. And it was, in fact, one of the programs that he was most proud of as his legacy. And so it's part of the legacy of the civil rights movement. But then beyond that, in this day and age, to have a statute that recognizes that there are important barriers to educational achievement and that those barriers are race. It's an explicitly race-conscious federal statute, which in this day and age is a radical piece of law. But also it recognizes that language ability, which is the subject of our discussion here, poverty and disability, that perceptions around students in these categories can be impediments to learning. So that's really the framework from which I and many of our organizations here will be discussing this law. But that said, current law is deeply flawed. It's deeply flawed for English language learners. Current law, and continuing along the path that we've been following, has very little support on or off the Hill. And we've learned a lot over the last several years of implementation, and a lot that should inform our efforts to fix this law. I'm going to focus just here upon sort of the big ticket issue of testing and accountability in Title I, Part A. We will hear, I think, later on about teaching and funding issues, because certainly, even though much of the discussion is around the testing, there are other very important provisions at issue here. And the biggest problem, as we heard Congressman Hinojosa refer to earlier, is that most ELLs in this country are getting tests that actually don't adequately measure what they're learning. So that's a huge problem, and it's really been, this is the cornerstone of No Child Left Behind. If you're going to have consequences and a whole series of accountability decisions to be made on the basis of assessment results, then you need to make sure that those assessment results are actually meaningful for all students. As a side note, No Child Left Behind did not create the assessment requirements. Actually, they date back to the '94 Act, the Improving America's Schools Act, so this is not a new requirement from No Child Left Behind. But MALDEF has been working for many years, but since the adoption of No Child Left Behind, to improve the quality of assessments for English language learners. And we've done that in a couple of different ways. First is by being a founding partner of the LEP Partnership, it's called. And it's basically a technical assistance body by the Department of Education, which had not given enough guidance to states in how to develop appropriate assessments. And so that was created in 2006. And it's MALDEF, NCLR, the Council of Chief State School Officers, the U.S. Department of Education, all 50 states and D.C. and Puerto Rico have all participated in this. And the purpose of that is to improve the quality of assessments that are available for ELLs. Certainly, we still have a long ways to go, and funding continues to be an issue in terms of having the money available to develop appropriate assessments. But we are making progress through under current law to create better assessments, but also through the Hispanic Education Coalition, of which MALDEF is a member, LULAC is a member. We have 26 key national and local organizations involved with Hispanic educational outcomes. We've also been working in the renewal of the law, the reauthorization process, to ensure, in addition to other changes that are important to us, that current law supports better testing practices for ELLs. And so the House worked very well with us, and we worked also with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. to present recommendations, and we develop lengthy recommendations, and the ones that I'll focus on here will be around the assessment and the accountability pieces. And many of these recommendations, if not most, were in fact included in the House draft, and we're working with the Senate to do the same over there. And it's really sort of a package. And we've learned under NCLB implementation that we can't trust states to do the right thing in terms of ELL assessment development. As Michael pointed out, I was a bilingual credential teacher in California in the late 90s, and this was right before Proposition 227 that Congressman Honda referenced actually made my teaching credential effectively moot because it eliminated bilingual education in California. Now, they've since figured out a waiver process, but basically the number of students that have that kind of service, it's gone down by half since Proposition 227, which actually predates No Child Left Behind. It was 1998. But it has had a very negative effect, and it sort of goes to the political challenges around English language learners. As a side note, when we're debating instructional methods, you don't see the sort of cultural baggage. You don't see the kind of tension around that you see in bilingual education. The debate between whole language and phonics, I mean, certainly it's a vigorous debate, but in terms of methods of instructing reading, but bilingual education is particularly loaded and really has generated a lot of tension from non-educators. We had Newt Gingrich in front of a convention in Florida last year who said we need to stop teaching in the language of the ghetto and make sure that we teach the language of prosperity. So we don't have political figures going after instructional methods in the same way that we do around these language issues, which are also, of course, cultural issues. But the package that we have been supportive of in terms of renewing and fixing the law includes several key components. The first is targeted funding. I mean, funding has been a significant concern, the low levels of funding for No Child Left Behind, so that states haven't really prioritized spending funds on the development of assessments that make sense for English language learners. So the House draft actually included a very important provision, which is that if your state has not been approved with an effective assessment system for English language learners, it has to target 16.5% of its assessment funds, which is a $400 million pool of funds, to this sole purpose, to assessment development for ELLs. And from the date that the bill is signed into law, there will be a 2-year window where states that are not on board with the good assessment system will have to target these funds. But then during that 2-year window, in fact, there's going to be a flexibility for districts. We have many districts that face challenges in showing the learning levels of English language learners because their state hasn't yet developed an appropriate assessment. Well, you want to give some relief to these school systems, and so there will be a different way of measuring AYP for these kids, basically using an English language proficiency assessment for 2 years for low-level ELL kids. But then if after 2 years, using these funds, a state still hasn't done the right thing to develop good assessments for English language learners, the Secretary is required, the Secretary of Education, to withhold administrative funds from the states. In other words, there will be a financial penalty to states that don't get on board with assessing ELLs properly. There's another flexibility that we've generally been supportive of. There's some concern that ELLs is a fluid group, that you have students who enter and then students who exit, and so therefore it's a particularly challenging group. Well, so we actually are supporting a change in the law that would allow districts and schools to count ELLs for 3 years after they've exited the ELL subgroup to counterbalance the fact that you're going to continually have new ELLs coming in. So this package of targeted funding, really putting teeth in the law to require states to improve assessment systems, but then also recognizing that as we're developing those assessment systems, that we need to provide some flexibility and some assistance to schools and districts. That has been that is included in the House draft. We're very supportive of moving that piece forward. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus, CAPAC have each been supportive of this provision, so we're very invested in moving the ball forward on this.